Hey guys, welcome to Mander's Mindset. Before we dive in, I wanted to let you know I will be releasing a handful of episodes back to back before I head off to Bali. These conversations are just too good for me to sit on. And honestly, like my friend Sean once said on this podcast here, episode 69, there are no rules. There are no rules that say I have to wait or space things out a certain way, or that I can only release episodes on Mondays. I'm not about to hold on to something powerful just because life is shifting. So I'm clearing space, releasing what's ready to be released, and letting you tune into whatever resonates to you. I'm not waiting, and maybe this is your permission not to wait either. Now let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Mander's Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome to Mander's Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am here today with Dr. Amy Rosner. And Amy holds a PhD in experimental psychology, and she spent 15 years teaching college psychology classes and doing brain research. And we are super fascinated with all things brain and mind. Thank you so much for joining me, Amy.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, who would you say Amy is at the core?
Who is Amy at the core? So, yes, good question. So, a creator. I'd have to say Amy is a creator. It's always been, my favorite quote, life is a work of art created by the one who lives it, right? And that's kind of been my journey, my thought process, kind of where I've just innately identified, I guess, is as a creator, artistically and otherwise. I was always big in especially painting, and I was an artist for a while. I dabble, here and there, but I'm always really big on creating things, whether it's creating your life, creating your business. And what I do now is all about getting rid of any kind of blocks to be able to move forward and creating whatever it is that people want. So it's really fun for me to, not just with my journey, but with other people's journey, help them create whatever the life is they want to have and move in that direction unencumbered so they can get there and keep moving. So yeah, I think everything has to do with creating at the core of who I am.
I love how you mentioned creating your life. I really think we are the authors of our own stories, Can you take us down memory lane a little bit? Tell us about your childhood, upbringing, family dynamic, however deep you want to take that.
Sure. So I'm a native of Phoenix, Arizona. I think I'm one of 3 natives left. Had a great childhood. Wound up going to college in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. That was fantastic. Ripon College. Got a taste of psychology there. Became a psychology major and got an amazing education from that place. I wound up actually skipping or teaching a bit of my graduate coursework because of the education I got at Ripon. So good plug for Ripon College. Great school. Had a great time there. They could tell I was from the Southwest, though, because whenever it would snow, I'd go out and be playing in the snow, and everybody else is like, oh, it's snowing. Being from Massachusetts, you probably understand what I'm talking about. I got really into brain stuff and wanted to get a graduate degree, and so wound up with a PhD in experimental neuropsychology from University of Memphis. Fun place to visit. And Beale Street, got it going on. And it's just been a lot of fun. And then since then, it was heavy research, brain research and all of that. And then I became a psychology professor in a couple different schools. And I loved teaching classes in the psychology of creativity and art. And of course, the cold, creepy stuff, the brain stuff, the statistics, things like that. And so I like that I've got the, warm, fuzzy stuff and the cold, creepy stuff kind of in equal parts in my head, which makes it a lot of fun. So just a lot of experimenting and enjoying learning. And then I wound up doing a few different things to kind of experiment with, how I wanted to create myself going forward, because I knew it wasn't as in the typical professor mold. So I wound up in coaching, life coaching, and hypnotherapy and NLP work. And now I'm training other people to do that. And so that's where I'm at.
Now, what made you decide to go to school for psychology in the first place?
So in high school, I took my first psychology class. So they had just a basic kind of intro to psychology class. And I thought that was just the coolest thing ever. And I had no idea what psychology was until then, but I just thought that was the coolest thing. And I loved just having an understanding about why we do the things we do and how we're set up. And it came down to all brain stuff. As soon as I realized what the brain was and what it did, I was hooked. And I just had to find out more.
So you knew from that one class?
Yeah. So when I went to college, I wanted to be a psych major as soon as I went to college, but I kept thinking, okay, that's not practical, So I should get like a business degree instead. And I'm so not a business person. I am, but I'm not. And my dad was big in the business world. And so he's like, okay, don't go for like business management. Go for something specific like economics. That looks better. I'm like, okay. So I took an econ class. Only class I've ever dropped was my econ class. I hated it. It totally was not for me. And, even my business, which has been really successful, I've helped other people build successful businesses. And I do not follow that mold at all. I'm totally off the wall. Would never had a business plan or anything like that. Don't have financial goals, for every month, things like that. But yeah, I just don't fit that mold. So that's when I was like, okay, practical or not, I'm going for psychology and just see where I go.
Good for you. I relate to everything you just said, though, coincidentally enough. I got a minor in psychology and my bachelor's in legal studies and sociology. But originally I had my minor in economics because I was like, that makes a lot of sense. It's really practical.
Yeah.
It was the only class I dropped in college. Yes, I said I cannot do that. I cannot do this. And I even called my mom and I was like, this is awful. And she was like, well, maybe you should drop it because you're not going to get a good grade. And I was like, yeah, I can't do this.
That's funny.
And I get what you mean. It's interesting to me why people do certain things. I get that. So you got your undergraduate degree and then you went for your graduate degree. Was that right after?
It was, although I wound up in a program that they changed the emphasis of the program between when I visited there and when I was accepted there. It was at Syracuse University. And so I went for a year. It just wasn't what I vibed with. So I decided, okay, well, I'll take those deadlines for admission only come up once a year. And so I thought, okay, I'll just take the rest of the year off. I worked in a furniture store and made some really good friends. And that was actually a lot of fun. I reapplied for other schools and I wound up at University of Memphis in a program that was exactly what I was looking for.
It was exactly what you were looking for. So it just kind of fell into place.
Yeah, it did. So that was a lot of fun. And it was more, I really got into experimental neuropsychology was the thing that I really loved. And so that's kind of what part of your brain makes you do this kind of thing. Lateralization of function, localization of function, cerebral dominance, things like that. The different parts of the brain, what they do, how they contribute to different functions and how we can intervene at different points along those networks and help people out if they're having trouble.
How we can intervene. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So in clinical neuropsychology, they give tests, they, have brain scans, things like that, and they can kind of tell, okay, maybe there's some damage in this particular part of the brain, and that's why this person's having this difficulty. And so let's work on the highway may be out, but there are some back roads that are still in place. And so let's help this person change things around so they can use those back roads. I was experimental neuropsych, not clinical neuropsych. So what I did was animal research where we would actually make lesions in different parts of the brain to see how damage in those parts affected the rats, in this case, that I used. And so that information was helpful to the clinical neuropsychologists to help their patients. So I was on the basic research end of that. And then developed a horrible allergy to rats. And so eventually got out of that and I was interested in right versus left hemispheric functioning and cerebral dominance. And so I did some of that in rats, actually. There is laterality in rat brains, but wound up studying people. And that I draw on a lot of that now in my current position. And actually just wrote a book about that, kind of marrying the two, the basic neuroscience research having a lot to do with that hemispheric asymmetry and hypnotherapy and what we actually do when we're doing these kind of subconscious interventions to help people reprogram what's going on in their heads.
That's so fascinating. Now, how long did you do the research with the rats for?
That was, let's see, I was in grad school doing rat stuff for 5 years.
I didn't realize you could test that much with rats.
In rat, you don't see the same kind of laterality that you do in humans. In humans, the left hemisphere has a lot more to do with language, for example, than the right hemisphere does. And you see that in everybody. People have varying degrees of language function in the right hemisphere, but it's never going to be as much as in the left. We all have that particular bias. In rats, at least in the research that I did and what was known at the time, so I don't know if it's changed at all, but at the time, you could see some rats would show laterality for a particular task, like the left hemisphere would appear to be more in charge in one rat, and then the other hemisphere might be more in charge in another rat. So you see laterality, but not necessarily it's the same from one rat to the next. It may change. The hemisphere that's doing most of the work may change from one rat to the next.
That's fascinating to me. I've never spoken to someone who's actually done rat research. Okay.
Well, you're the first one to ask me about rat laterality. So, the big gold star to you because I've never gotten that question. So,
oh my gosh. That's so funny. Now, you mentioned something about the subconscious, about us rewiring that. You were saying something about how we do that in humans.
So, there's a thing called neuroplasticity. Actually, there are several different kinds of neuroplasticity. And that means that our nerve cells, in the brain can change how they communicate with one another and change their functioning. And that neuroplasticity allows us to change how things are wired up in our brains. And so if there's some maladaptive programming, some maladaptive wiring, communication between nerve cells up there, we can change that. And we change it with hypnotherapy very quickly and easily by just tapping into the natural processes that the brain uses to change things in any other kind of setting. So if we're in a particular position somewhere where you associate one thing with something else, and then we go to some other place and one of those things is there, we're going to expect the other thing as well. We run on predictability. And so our brains are always trying to predict what's going to happen, what we're going to find places, how we should interact with our environment. And if there's a surprise or if there's something that's different than what our brains predict, then there's prediction error, and our brain is going to change the connections and the strength of the connections, the programming that we have in order to have a hopefully better interaction with that kind of environment next time we're in it. So it's just a natural way that the brain works. It's what I call everyday neuroplasticity. It's just the natural changing of our wiring in response to prediction error that we encounter in our environment when we interact. Subconscious processes like hypnotherapy, NLP, things like that, you tap right into that everyday neuroplasticity and allow people to make the kind of changes that could be made naturally if they were in a certain kind of situation. But in a chair in a hypnotherapist's office, we can use some brain hacks to make that same change, allow that client to make the same change on demand.
Now, what do you say to people who have those skepticisms about hypnosis?
So hypnosis is a thing, whether you believe in it or not. Science doesn't care what you believe. Some things just are. And hypnosis is just a natural brain state that we all put ourselves in multiple times a day. When you go to sleep at night, you have to go through a hypnagogic state. When you wake up in the morning, you go through a hypnopompic state. When you're really involved in doing a task and you're in that flow state and you're not hearing someone talking to you from 2 feet away, you're in a hypnotic state. Highway hypnosis, that's actually a hypnosis state. it's the most productive state you can be in. And when you're trying to perform at a high level of music or sports or whatever, you have to be in a hypnotic state. Creative thinking is a hypnotic state. There are many times that we go into that state. If you're overwhelmed, if you're bored, if you're surprised, startled, your brain will automatically put you in that hypnotic state. So it's a natural, really healthy state where we should spend most of our time, actually. And then, that stress level can creep up once in a while when we need it to, when we need a little kick to really move in a certain direction. But otherwise, staying in that relaxed state is where we should be. That's where we need to be to detox our bodies and do that housekeeping that we can't do when we're running around and trying to get stuff done. So there are a lot of misconceptions about hypnosis and hypnotherapy, and they've been around forever. Things like it's mind reading or mind control. No, I can't read your mind, nor do I want to. And I have no desire to try to control anybody. It's more of an educational process, really. It's a way to help people get more control of their own minds and bodies. So it's not brainwashing or anything like that. The client has control of everything all the time. In fact, I've never hypnotized anyone but myself. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis, technically speaking. So if you don't want to go into that state, sitting in my office, then you don't have to. I can't make you. I have some tricks that'll kind of get your brain thinking about maybe going there and have a greater chance of going there, but I can't make you. And so, and the client's in control all the time. But a lot of people think that you have to be weak-minded in order to, be a good hypnosis subject. And no, actually, if anything, you can argue the opposite is the case, that you need to be more in control of what's going on in your head. But a lot of times when we think about control, we think of what I call illusory control. It's like trying to control everything that's going on in your head, trying to control your thoughts. Oh, no, I'm not going to think about this negative thing. I'm going to think about this positive thing instead. I'm going to force this change. And the thing about that is that's a willpower thing. That's a discipline thing. That's a conscious mind thing. That's, between 2 and 5% of brain activity, depending on who you read. So that's a very tiny amount of, brain involved in that. The other 95 to 98% is going to win every time, right? If you're going to make a change, trying really hard to change, as soon as you start trying, you've lost the fight. So as counterintuitive as it may seem, in order to get control, you need to give up and just feel what resonates with you. And then if something resonates in a negative way or something doesn't resonate, there's dissonance, then there are things you can do to let that go in a healthy way. So you're actually letting it go and not just stuffing it under some mental rug somewhere. So it's going to keep negatively impacting you, even though we're really good at doing that. And so at some point that needs to come out and be dealt with and let go so that you can get on with things. And so that's what we do, is just help people find those emotional things under those mental rugs and let them go in an easy and healthy way.
I like how you mentioned that so many people are trying to control something, like with hypnosis, anything people don't fully understand, they have skepticisms about. I was curious what you said to that. You mentioned a word about when we first wake up. It's hypnopompic. What is that? I've never heard that word in my life.
Hypnopompic. That's just the state that we're in as we're coming out of sleep. And it's a hypnotic state.
Okay. It's different than when we're going to sleep.
So that state they call hypnagogic, is you're going from awake into sleep. That hypnotic state you pass through. And, that state, it's the reason that, our brain waits until we're almost asleep to bring up things like, okay, I have to know why we drive on parkways and park on driveways. Like this, it comes up then because you're in that hypnotic state. And so your mind is kind of open to everything, right? So this is something that doesn't make any difference whatsoever and you need to get to sleep, but it's going to come up at that time, right? Because you're in that hypnotic state and the control of your brain processes has changed and everything's open. That right hemisphere is in charge and it's open in everything. And all this processing is going on at the same time. All of the emotional and self-referent kind of stuff comes out. Issues that you might have going on in your life difficulties you're having, anything you need to get a handle on and you don't have worked out, it's still bothering you. If you don't work that stuff out during the day, your brain's going to try to work it out at night, and it's going to start in that hypnagogic state as you're trying to go to sleep. And so a lot of people lose a lot of sleep because of the difficulties they're having, because they keep trying to push it under a mental rug all throughout the day. And then at night, it comes out because you go into that hypnotic state. And as soon as you go into that state, that's when your brain's like, oh, okay, let's bring this up. Now it's time to do something about this. But, the other part of your brain is going, no, we can't do anything about that. We have to keep it shoved under that rug. And so you just kind of fight with yourself.
Do you have any suggestions for people to not deal with that at night?
Deal with it during the day. So, and if you don't know how, find someone who can help you do that. That's why we do what we do, is to help people let go of that kind of stuff so that they can let it go and get some sleep. So, for example, I had a client come in one time that was having a horrible time sleeping. And, usually it's a very quick fix, like one session and they're good to go. And so I did just a kind of basic session that usually helps people sleep. And she was yawning so much after that session, she didn't think she'd make it home. But she made it home. And then I got a really long email from her the next day saying she had the worst night's sleep she'd had in years. And I thought, oh man, what happened there? She came back, and as it turns out, I said, okay, so don't do the exercise I was telling you to do where you're telling yourself that, give yourself suggestions that you sleep well at night and everything. I said, just tell yourself you're okay and come on back in and let's find out why this is happening. And so we did a little deeper dive next time, let her head take us to what was really going on, what the real problem was. And when you're in that hypnotic state, and you say, okay, go back to another time when you felt this way. Where are you going? And what kind of situation are you in? And tell me about it. And so, she went back to, she felt really guilty because one of her parents across the country was having a hard time and probably at end of life. And some of her siblings were there helping to take care of them, but she wasn't. She was across the country here in Arizona, and she felt guilty that she couldn't just keep flying back there. It was just way too expensive and time consuming. So she felt like a bad daughter. And so we dealt with that guilt and that limiting belief that she was a bad daughter. And after 3 sessions total, she was sleeping better than ever. And and that was like 12 years ago, and she's still sleeping well, hasn't had a problem since. So that's 3 sessions, a total of 3 hours. And she never had a sleeping problem again. Now, can you fix that on your own? Maybe. It just depends on what it is. Sometimes your brain just needs a little help. It's having a hard time fixing something on its own, and it just needs a little support, a little help. And that's what people like me are good for, to just give the brain a little helping hand and use a little brain hack that makes it easy for it to make that change.
That's amazing. And even like that, it was a little deeper, but you were able to do it.
So even with a deeper issue involved, it still only took 3 hours to be done with it forever. So it's very fast and it's very easy. It's emotionally easy for, clients to go through. Sometimes they can't go through some more traditional, psychotherapy approaches to similar sorts of things, say something traumatic. If they use EMDR, for example, it can be emotionally difficult for them to go through that and somewhat time consuming. And I can help prepare people sometimes for going through those. I was helping a number of people do that. We have a kind of technique that we use that is really emotionally easy for people to go through. It's usually 1 session and done, and no other intervention necessary. And it's just because we're not just having a conscious dialogue with somebody. I honestly don't care what all the stuff is that you're thinking and feeling and your experiences and all of that. All I care about is, what are you having difficulty with that you want to get a handle on? And then, what can we fix? What can we change that will help you get past that block that you have to moving forward where you want to move? So it's not a big back and forth kind of thing. Sometimes there's some of that, but it's just a very easy and quick process. And it's because we're tapping into those natural everyday neuroplasticity processes that the brain uses. So it's easy.
Wow. That's so fascinating to me. I think I've always had my mixed feelings on traditional talk therapy. I get it. It helps some people, but I don't think ruminating on whatever the issue is really what are you doing about it?
Yeah. So there's one of the things that you bring up a really good point, and that is if you keep, what you focus on, you get more of, right? So and that's just the brain works. Repetition, it will, solidify some programming. So if you're going to strengthen a program up there, a belief, an action, whatever, a habit by continuing to think about it and focus on it and continue to do it, then, that's not helping you. And so if you really want to get rid of it, you need to stop focusing on it. Right? You need to have some kind of alternative, a different road to go down rather than that one, right? If you're just talking to somebody about it over and over again, that's not going to do you any good, most likely, because you're just strengthening that programming, right? But it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you want to get a better understanding of what may be going on with yourself or your family, then traditional therapies are a really good way to go. If you are trying to get past something that your brain processed as a trauma, it's not going to hold up quite as well unless there's a very few psychotherapists that do somatic or somatosensory psychotherapy along those lines, which are very good for handling trauma. But there has to be a body component to trauma. And so if you're just having a conscious dialogue with a therapist or with a coach for that matter, you're not going to be able to get past that trauma. You may have a better understanding of it. You may have some good coping mechanisms that can help you, but you're not going to get past it. And so when I have people come in who've said that, they went through something. In fact, I just had one yesterday who said that, 70 years prior, he was in a situation that he already worked on in therapy and he got over it. But he went right there in our session, went right back to that when he was just a few years old. And there was still emotion there that did not leave, So no, he did not finish processing that, even though he thought he did. So there's a difference in focus. In hypnotherapy, we're focused on the emotional stuff. We're taking a swan dive down into the emotional stuff. I don't want to talk to you any more than necessary because it's just going to distract us from the real work. So don't tell me all about your childhood and everything. Just tell me about the one thing that's relevant. And then just so that your brain knows what we're focused on. And then here's what I want you to do with it. Imagine this. And then you're doing the work. I'm not even doing the work. In fact, I've had sessions where to this day, I don't know what they were about. Had no idea what the sessions were about. Because if you have something traumatic that happened, and it had one young lady that couldn't go back to school, something happened at school. And I said, well, can you tell me about it? And she said, no. And I said, well, can you visualize it like a little mental movie playing in front of you? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. And I walked her through the process of what to do with that little mental movie. And afterwards, she felt better and she could go back to school. I have no idea what that was about. I've had other sessions like that too. So you're the one that's making the changes. You're the one that's in charge of all of that. You're in control. You're making the changes. I'm just like your Sherpa. So I've got the map and I've got your packs on my llama and I'm helping you get to where you want to go, but you have to tell me where you want to go and you have to hoof it. I can't walk for you. You have to do the walking. So it's what we call a co-creative process where we both have a role to play to help you get where you want to go. So I just have a strategy that I can, help you implement, and then you can make whatever changes you want to make.
I like how you mentioned it's a different focus, that versus traditional therapy. I get there's the benefits to everything, but I even did it at one point years and years ago, but it was like, then what? You got to it's good to talk. It's good to process. You don't want it to ruminate, but you want to extend and get more of it. But then what? After I talk about it, I remember thinking to myself, okay, now what?
Actually, the reason I wrote the book that I just put out last year was because I wanted people to understand that hypnotherapy deserves a seat at the table with psychotherapy and medication for dealing with any kind of behavioral or cognitive or emotional issues, because we're focused on something different. We really are. I know that there are big differences in how we work and how therapists work. And I know this just from people coming in saying they've done 30 years of therapy and didn't have the results they had from the first session they did of hypnotherapy. Not everyone's going to be in this ballpark. Some people are going to get the most benefit from therapy. Some people are going to get the most benefit from medication. Some people are going to use all three, and that's going to be just the golden approach for them. So they really are different, and they offer different advantages and different disadvantages as well. And it's an individual thing. What are you trying to change? And what do you feel most comfortable with? make a decision that way. But I think that a lot of people don't understand that hypnotherapy is as viable an option as psychotherapy and medication for making changes in mental health.
When you wrote the book, was that part of your intention to
Yeah.
bring more awareness?
Yeah, exactly. Because like I said, there are a lot of misconceptions about it. And there aren't a lot of doctors or therapists or journalists or anybody else that will recommend hypnotherapy to their patients or to the public. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I think it comes from a lack of understanding. And, hypnotherapy was born of the medical community. It's a medical thing. 150 years ago in medicine, that's where it comes from. In fact, we were the first psychotherapy. And then, medication came along, and then traditional, like applying the medical model to mental illness. As soon as that started, then, a group of psychotherapists, and eventually became a combination of psychotherapy and hypnotherapy. But a group of people are like, oh, that's great. Let's do that. A very small group of people stayed behind saying, we don't see that going well. We're not going to do that. And so the big group took off and kept the psychotherapy title, and the little group stayed behind and called themselves hypnotherapists. But it was all born of the medical community. We're the OGs, right? They're alternative. But it was born of the medical community, and it's still an elective in medical schools. You can take, therapy is an elective in medical school. And I can always tell the people who took it and the people who didn't. When I talk with doctors, there's a small but really awesome contingent of doctors that will direct their patients, recommend to their patients that they seek hypnotherapy for certain things. I have a lot of doctors that I work with as my clients, and a lot of nurses. A lot of people in the medical community are my clients. I had one client who went in for surgery, and she was a nurse, and she was having surgery at the hospital where she worked. She'd been there for like 30 years. And she was doing an exam before surgery. A doctor who knew her really well and had helped her with a few other surgeries in the past said, you're acting really weird. I don't like how you're acting. It just seems weird. It's like you're off somehow. And I'm thinking about suggesting that we postpone the surgery. And he said, what are you doing differently this time around? And she said, well, I'm doing hypnotherapy this time. And he said, oh, and she told him a little bit about it. And he said, well, who is the person that you're seeing? And she told him it was me. And he said, oh, I have another patient who was seeing her. Okay, surgery's back on. Do whatever she says. And she went through it with no problem, no pain meds, no nothing. For the first time ever, she didn't have any nausea after surgery and healed up really fast. And so she noticed a huge difference, and so did her doctors. And, now they send people my way too. So yeah, there are definitely people in the medical community where this came from that are big fans. And then there are others that are just so focused on medication that they, don't even, but sometimes I was around one doctor one time that as soon as he found out what I did, he wouldn't talk to me anymore. He just wouldn't talk to me. And there were only 3 of us in this little group, and he wouldn't talk to me. And he just said, well, I prescribe medication. And then he wouldn't talk to me anymore. So, there's there are individual differences, obviously, and, people's opinions about that. But at the very worst, what is the worst that's going to happen if somebody comes in for hypnotherapy and it doesn't get them where they want to go? Well, they're probably still going to be sleeping better just because of that. They're going to have a lower stress level, lower physiological arousal level, be feeling better. Emotions will be more leveled out, have more self-confidence, feel a little more empowered. Those are the side effects of having hypnotherapy sessions. So even if you don't get where you want to go, at least you're going to have some positive outcome. But odds are overwhelmingly that you will get where you want to go, or at least part of the way there, but most likely the entire way there.
That's so interesting to me that some doctors are so against it. I'm not fully anti-pharmaceuticals, but I am very skeptical about a lot of them because they come with so many side effects. I had daily chronic migraines when I was pretty young, to the point where they went through all these different pharmaceuticals for me, and one of them made me faint in a public mall.
Oh,
and they didn't want me to stop taking it. And I'm like, what the hell is the disconnect here? So many doctors, their first thing is take a pill for this.
Yeah.
But sometimes the side effects are worse than what I'm coming to you for the pill for.
Yeah, I actually had two nurses who came to me because they had bladder control issues, and they had heard that hypnotherapy can help with that. And it does. It works really well for bladder control issues and a lot of medical issues. And so they knew that the success rate of the meds was not good. I think it was like 50% or something at the time. And so they knew as soon as they talked to their doctor about it, they were just going to write a prescription. So they wanted to try hypnotherapy. And so between those two of my clients, they both got bladder control back in about 2 weeks, full control back in 2 weeks. I got some good suggestions and imagery that worked for both of them. So I put out a generic recording for anybody who wanted to try that before going down the medication or surgery pathway, depending on what they needed. I had quite a few people telling me that worked really well and that they didn't need to be on medication. So that came from nurses that knew the medication was not going to do a great job, most likely. And so they wanted to try this first, and it worked really well. So if you can spend $27 on a recording with nothing but positive side effects and get rid of a bladder control issue in 2 weeks, instead of taking medication that may or may not work, may or may not have some bad side effects for you, or God forbid, have surgery for it, I'd say I'd rather try the first one first and see how that does. And if somebody needs medication, it's really great that we have it. Like, I am not anti-medication at all. There is a place for it. And if you need it, same with surgery, like if you need it. But I do think that it's in patients' best interest to try the least invasive approach first that has the least potential for damage.
I completely agree with that. Like you mentioned at one point, even if it doesn't get rid of the problem, it's not going to cause you an issue. It'll boost your self-esteem. It'll give you other positive benefits, even if it doesn't do the specific thing you're looking for. And it doesn't mean you can't then try the medication.
Right.
Try something else. I'm very skeptical about stuff like that because I was 19 years old fainting.
Yeah.
In my canoeing. Yeah, you know what I mean? And it's like, I'm not going to faint from hypnosis,
Right.
It's like, so I even had the doctor say to me, you don't know what could happen. And I was like, I don't know what could happen. Am I going to faint again? Well, I already did. I don't mind. Like stopping at cold turkey, like there's no barrier to entry to this, which is a big thing to me, Like,
yeah. I mean, it's a serious thing. And a lot of my clients wind up getting off of medication after maybe a short period of time, or maybe it takes a longer period of time and they have to keep moving down as time goes on until they can finally get off of it. And all of it's done, between them and their doctor. But if they're not having the same symptoms anymore because they're cleaning some stuff up emotionally and they're feeling better, then their doctor can take them off of the medication. I had a client that had uveitis, which is a really debilitating autoimmune problem. And she'd had it for a long time, a series of autoimmune issues, and nobody could figure out what was going on. And so a friend told her about me, and we did like a dozen sessions together. She got to a point about halfway through where her doctor, she was feeling a lot better. She wasn't having flare-ups, and her doctor took her off of her medication. And then she had to get together with her family. And right after she got to the parents' house, she had a flare-up and she had to go back on her medication. Then she came back and we had a session, and I said, okay, so family. So are you ready to deal with the family stuff now so that we can get you, get whatever this is cleared up? And she said, yeah, there was some serious family stuff that was at the root cause of all of this. And when we cleared that up, our doctor took her off her medication again, and she never went back on it. It turned a lot of things around for her just getting past that. Now that was 12 sessions, which is, decent amount of time to spend with hypnotherapy, but it's nothing compared to years of psychotherapy or staying on medication forever. Every time you have a flare up, having to deal with that and then take a medication as a Band-Aid, because it's not curing the problem. It's just dealing with it on the back end after it happens. She would have to keep using that as long as she had the problem.
And she completely was off medication.
Yeah. So as symptoms decrease, if people feel better, and to me, they're not symptoms. It's just, okay, how are you feeling? Are you feeling bad about something? Okay, let's get you feeling better about it, whatever that is. But to a doctor, it would be a symptom. And so, if they're not having those same symptoms anymore, then the doctor's like, okay, well, let's wean you off or reduce the dose. Hypnotherapy sometimes can help people get off of medication. Sometimes it can just help the medication work better. And so you don't need as much. You can really reduce the amount that you're taking.
You mentioned a recorder, so people don't have to do this with you live?
Not necessarily. For most of the big stuff, you're going to want to do something live with someone, a custom session, but you don't necessarily need a lot of those. It just depends on what the issue is. If somebody has a long history of a lot of pretty horrible stuff going on with them, then that may be a lifelong pursuit to get a handle on that and keep feeling better and keep moving forward. If somebody has one problem they want to get past, or they have some situations that just don't feel really good, or they're just not happy and they want to try to create a life for themselves that is more like what they want. Sometimes it just doesn't take that much. And sometimes people already know what they need to do. They've just gotten out of the habit of doing it. So just getting back to healthy habits, for example, maybe all you need is a recording to just remind you to get back in those healthy habits instead of coming in for sessions one-on-one. If it's something that you really don't know how to change, you don't know what you need to do, it's not just a simple habit kind of thing, then you probably do need to come in for sessions, at least at the beginning. But there's also a lot you can do in between sessions. So I always give my clients homework, give them what we call accelerators, which are some things you can do for yourself. And I have a lot of them available for free on my website too, in my online group. I call it the Stretch and Smile Club. Anybody can go there, become a member for free. You go to the Learning tab, there's workbook resources. I have a workbook, a companion to the book that I published, and it has 100 pages of self-help for doing stuff just like this. And then all the audio and video files are in the online group that anybody can access anytime. So I have a lot of free materials, books that give everything I know that people can do on their own to reprogram what's going on in their brains. And there's a lot you can do. You can't do everything on your own, but there's a lot you can do. And between sessions, there's a lot you can do to just increase your and accelerate your progress.
So can you tell us what you'd say is like the number one thing people could do to
my favorite thing ever is what's called an anchor. And it's a neurolinguistic programming little brain hack. And what you do is you stack a good feeling onto something like, it can be anything, but I just have you put your fingers together like this because this is with you all the time. It's free. You don't have to figure out where to get it. Like it's right there. And what we do is we stack a good feeling onto this anchor. And so you want to set one up right now? You can see how to do that. So keep your thumb and finger apart for right now. Close your eyes. Just take a breath. All right. Now think of something that you would like to change, some feeling that you have in a certain situation that you'd like to feel better. If you have a negative feeling when you're with a certain person or doing a certain activity, let me know when you have that.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. All right. Now go back to something in your life that feels really good. Sometime that just when you think about it, brings smile, just like that. You just thought of it, didn't you? Okay.
Yep.
Now, I want you to really feel those good feelings. Let yourself feel them really strongly. And when you're really feeling them, put that thumb and finger together. Just touch them together and take a deep breath in. Like you're breathing those good feelings all through your body. Feels good, right? Yeah. All right. Very good. Now let go of your thumb and finger. And with your eyes still closed, move your eyeballs up, down, side to side, and straight ahead. And now put your thumb and finger together again. Take a deep breath. You feel those good feelings come back? Perfect. All right. Good. Now let go of your thumb and finger. Eyes up, down, side to side, and straight ahead. Now see yourself doing that activity that felt not so good, that you want to get rid of a not so good feeling that you brought up at the very beginning. Can you see that? Can you see yourself in that situation? Put that thumb and finger together and take a deep breath in. And tell me how that feels now.
Better.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Open your eyes. Yeah. So that's just a real quick, that anyone who did that with us, you've now set good feelings on this anchor. Now what you can do is, now we've already automatically associated that in your brain through this everyday neuroplasticity. There's now a connection between these touch points, in your parietal lobe and those good feelings, from, probably temporal lobe. And there's a connection there that wasn't there before. It wasn't there 5 minutes ago, just by doing that. And so now whenever you do this, and you breathe in, you're going to feel those good feelings come back because of that association. Now, what we also did was we made a connection between that and this memory you have of one of those situations you weren't feeling so good in, that you want to feel better about, right? And so now that situation is associated with these good feelings. So it's going to feel a lot more doable. If you have a task you're procrastinating or you just don't want to do it, use that anchor and set it up to be connected with that task. Then it'll feel a lot more doable, just be a lot easier. And then you can also use it now that's set up. If you don't use it, it's good for probably the better part of a week. And then at some point at night, your brain's going to be getting rid of connections because you can only stay at about 100 trillion connections up here. So you have to keep pruning stuff down every night. And so it's like, okay, you're using this? No, it goes in the Goodwill box, right? Like that has to go. So that'll go away at some point if you don't use it. But if you keep using this, every time you just want a little burst of good feelings, you just use that. That's all you have to do. And that'll stay. Those good feelings will stay connected to those touch points. And then anytime you're in a situation that doesn't feel so good, you can just put your thumb and finger together and take a breath. And you'll instantly feel better. Your stress level will instantly come down noticeably. And nobody knows what you're doing.
That is so cool.
Comes in really handy.
And we did that so quick.
Yeah.
And I am so fascinated by that. Wow.
And there's a video that you can see for free on how to set an anchor in the Stretch and Smile Club that you can get to from my website. So anybody can do it anytime they want.
I love that. Thank you so much for showing that. And I love how you mentioned like the finger because you don't have to worry about not having the.
Oh, let me tell you. So there was one hypnotherapist that I met really early in my career. This guy, I just wanted to take a 2x4 to this guy's head at some point because he was just such a bad example of hypnotherapist. It's people like this that make the rest of us look bad. But he was doing anchors using a custom essential oil blend that only he made up. And so whenever you smelled that smell, instead of touch, it was smell. So you smelled the smell and then you felt the good feelings. Well, when you ran out, you'd have to go buy more oil from this guy because you wouldn't be able to make the same blend, right? So it's just a way for him to make more money off of people. I'm like, dude, you are just not giving us a good name by doing this. This is not cool. This is free. You have it with you all the time. And, you can always use it.
It's pretty simple. It's not this long, drawn out.
Yeah.
I know you said if you don't do it, you'll forget it, but it's not like something I have to let me write this down. Let me figure out the steps.
Right,
it's not complicated.
No.
I can remember that. Super practical. That's amazing.
There are a lot of really cool tips and tricks and ninja sneak attacks on the brain that we can use to help people get past some stuff as they're working on getting rid of it completely in sessions. So, yeah, got a lot of cool tricks.
I love that. I want to transition a tad. Now, you do some life coaching. Would you say coaching typically involves hypnosis?
Typically, no. Well, okay, let me see. I would say yes. Most people would say no. Coaches do not learn how to do hypnotherapy as such. However, there are different types of hypnotherapy. There are different ways of helping someone's brain go into a hypnotic state if it's inclined to do so. And one of those branches of hypnotherapy can really do that insidiously without you really understanding what's going on is called Ericksonian hypnotherapy. That is based on the work of Milton H. Erickson, who was a psychiatrist, so a medical doctor, and a really amazing guy. People either think that he was crazy or a genius. I think he was a genius. He talked about things like the concept of fractionation, for example, where if you repeatedly put someone in a position to be able to go into hypnosis, they're going to be more likely to go into that hypnotic state. And so if I say, how are you today? That's actually a question that leads you into a hypnotic state. Why? Because it's self-referent. It's about you and it's potentially emotional, right? And if I say, what would you like to change? What kind of change would you like to make in your life? That's another question that's going to lead you into a hypnotic state. Where do you see yourself a year from now? Where would you like to be? Or where have you been in the past where you don't want to go back to? What have you tried in the past that maybe didn't work for you? Both of those questions are leading you into a hypnotic state. Now we've got 4 questions leading you into a hypnotic state, a couple more, and you're going to be in hypnosis most likely, depending on how, likely your brain is at the time to go into that state. So a lot of coaches are helping their clients into a hypnotic state. So they are doing hypnosis. They just don't realize they are, and they don't understand what to do to maximize the benefit that they can help their client with when they're in that state. So in that state, that's when you can really find the good, correct answers to problems. Like, what's really behind this? That conscious mind is going to come up with a different answer, and it's probably going to be wrong. And so if you just have a conscious dialogue with someone and you say, why are you doing this? And you say, well, because of this, it's probably very logical and rational, and it's also probably wrong. And just like when you're trying to figure out what's going on with yourself, why can I not stick to my diet? This is a conscious mind thing, right? And so you figure it out, or you think you figure it out. And then you're like, okay, so all I have to do is this, make this change, and then I should be golden. And you make that change and it doesn't work. And then you get really frustrated. What's wrong with me? I can't figure it out, because you're asking the wrong part of the brain. That part of the brain doesn't know what the answer is. So it's going to make something up, and it's going to be logical and rational. It's going to make a lot of sense, but it's going to be wrong. And so coaches, I think a big disconnect is that they're asking their clients about, emotional and self-referent changes that they want to make, and are trying to help them with those, and are even in, I'd say probably the vast majority of cases in every session, helping their clients into a hypnotic state. And yet it's a conscious dialogue, right? So, if they're in that hypnotic state, they can take advantage of that fact and say, oh, hey, now this person's head is open. This person's brain actually can find the right answer. So now that I've asked a few self-referent or emotional questions and they seem to be calm, you can tell there's certain things you can kind of tell they are not looking emotional. They're not having a hard time talking about this. They may be in this hypnotic state. So how about we ask the questions that we want the real answers to now? Okay, so what's keeping you from being able to do this? Like, what's that block? You can have a much better time finding an answer at that point than you would if you were just like, okay, so what's going on, in a conscious way, and you don't have those leading questions to put them in that hypnotic state. And then a big problem that we see is that, we help them come up with a plan that feels good to them to change whatever they want to change so they can stick to their diet or whatever they want to do. If they're in that hypnotic state and you're having meaningful dialogue with the part of the brain that actually knows what the issue is and knows what changes should be made, you want to stay there and you want to give some suggestions, some imagery to help that programming change. You can change it right there. You can help that client change it right then and there. But instead, what do? Okay, let's come up with some SMART goals and a plan. Going right back into logical, rational territory, closing off. When that left hemisphere is in charge, it closes off a lot of the information coming from the right, which is where all the answers are. So there's, with that disconnect, there's a lot that coaches can do. And I actually train coaches and help them understand how to take advantage of these things and how to do some, easy, brain hacks, subconscious brain hacks to get them. And they don't have to do an induction and, your traditional, hypnotherapy kind of stuff to get all the benefits of their client being in that state. But they could get a lot better results for their clients a lot faster and keep a lot of clients on, and get a lot more referrals if they took advantage of that. But they're not trained to do that. Coaching programs don't train you to do that. So my I have a mentoring program, and it's training people in coaching, hypno, and NLP. And the hypno is both traditional and Ericksonian. And so that whole range. And they learn how to do all of that stuff. And then they get to decide what they want to use in their practice, what they don't, and formulate a custom practice for themselves. So you can be a coach and use some of these subconscious techniques to get maximum benefit for their clients. But it's like coaching on steroids because they know stuff that other coaches don't know.
Wow. No, that makes a lot of sense because it's past the logical portion of it. Like you mentioned the hemispheres and like that makes a lot of sense, and they're like, it helps to that certain degree, but then once you get to that next level, you know what I mean? Like the logical SMART goals aren't going to get you there.
An intellectual answer to an emotional problem is not going to work. So you have to meet the client where they're at. If it's an emotional issue, you need to take a swan dive down there and deal with it where it lives. And that can be done very easily and quickly using techniques that are not in traditional hypnotherapy. I started out as a coach, as a life coach, and then I added hypnotherapy, and then I added NLP, and then I made up some of my own techniques just to be able to deal with any possible situation. And if I have somebody that's just cannot get out of their head and they're just talking about something that really makes them feel bad, something traumatic, you can help them right there during their narrative as they're talking about it. You can, if you know how to keep their arousal level in check, get their head to do that reprogramming on the fly. Then 30 minutes later, they don't have the same traumatic feeling about that they did for the last 40 years or whatever. It's just amazing how quickly you can make some of those changes, and you can do it in just a regular kind of coaching session. It's just that most coaches don't know about this.
That's so true. I haven't heard a lot about it myself. A little bit here and there, but not to this level of everything you have shared with me today.
And then, the converse is also true. If you're doing hypnotherapy or NLP, then you're going to greatly benefit from having some education and coaching. Because if you're just like, okay, you want to stop smoking, lie back, relax. I'm going to read you the stop smoking script, and then you can pay me and leave. And, good luck. Like, that's just hypnosis with no coaching, right? But if you have coaching, it's like, okay, what is that feeling you have when you feel like you need to smoke? Can you get in touch with that feeling? When do you have that feeling? Oh, about once an hour when my boss starts coming around and checking on us in our cubicles, I just have to go outside and smoke, or I'm just going to go nuts, yell at him or whatever. I'm going to lose control. Okay. So keep smoking and let's deal with the boss thing, right? You don't get that from a hypnotherapy session. You get that from coaching. You can really find out more about where something is coming from with coaching techniques, and then be able to find out really what the cause of those things are with the subconsciously oriented stuff, and be able to make changes that way. So you put the two together, and NLP is a subconscious process too. You're basically in a hypnotic state for that. So, the coaching and the hypno together is just an amazing combination. And if you're missing one or the other, you're not going to have as good of results with your clients as you would otherwise have, for sure.
That makes so much sense that you need all of them together to piece this together. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Now, have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
I have.
So he's got a podcast called On Purpose, and he ends his podcast with 2 segments, and I end mine with them as well. The first segment is the many sides to us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
Ooh, okay.
The first question: what is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Thoughtful.
What is 1 word someone that knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Probably the same. I'll put way too much thought into everything.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Creative.
What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you as?
Stubborn.
What is 1 word that you're trying to embody right now?
Helpful.
Second segment is the final 5, and these 5 can be answered in a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
If it feels good, do it.
Why is that the best?
Because when we get older, and there's a lot of research on this, people don't regret the things they've done. They regret the things they haven't done.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
Gosh, that's a hard one. There were so many choices. Well, here's one I was just talking to somebody about earlier today. I don't know if this is advice or more of a meme kind of thing, but if you take offense to, or if somebody has something bad to say about you, it's about them. It's not about you. sometimes you're just a jerk and you need to see if maybe you could do things better. I think that's very bad advice. We all make mistakes, it's worth double checking and seeing, hey, could I have handled that better?
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one. Fashionable but uncomfortable clothing. How about that? I like fashionable, but it has to be comfortable.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be, as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
That I spent my time helping as many people as possible feel better about themselves and their lives, and they've gone on to help other people do the same.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
Be nice. Because there's not enough of that, especially right now.
That's true.
And we never know what other people are going through.
That is very true. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
It was so much fun to talk to you, Amanda.
Oh my gosh, of course. And now, where can listeners connect with you?
I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Amazon. My book and my workbook. I have a few books actually on Amazon. You can see my author page there. So there are a few places you can get in touch. But yeah, website's the easiest one.
I will link all that in the show notes. And do you have any final words of wisdom for the listeners? I do like to just give it back to the guest.
Final words of wisdom, man. You guys got a lot of really good questions that I haven't thought of in a long time, if ever. Some final advice. Pay more attention to resonance and dissonance, how things feel to you, than what your head is telling you, what that little voice in your head is telling you. Pay more attention to what resonates. Do more of that. Trust that, not the voice.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Mander's Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.